guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. If you guys are new here, welcome. Today is a yet another dupe video and we're going to dupe the newest Huda Beauty palette, and that is the Rose Quartz palette. This palette has 18 beautiful cool tone mauve pinky shade, which I especially do have in my collection because I'm big on mauves and purpley tones. So if you guys want to see how I dupe the newest Huda Beauty palette, then please keep on watching. So the newest Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette has 18 shades in it, out of which there are 8 mattes, 9 shimmers and 1 gloss. Now I don't know why did she again include that gloss that was there in the Naughty Nudes palette, because people were definitely not a fan of that. And it is a very similar formula, the same thing right in the center of the palette. Now it just made it more worse. Earlier in the Naughty Nudes palette, it was in the corner, or in like the left hand corner of the palette, but in this palette it's right in the center. So I don't know how people are going to react, and I'm pretty sure people are not going to react that well. One more thing, she came out with like a face gloss in the same texture. That just gives me, oh my god, it just turns me off. I would never have that in my collection. But yes, I absolutely love the color story of the palette, and that's why I'm going to dupe this with the palettes that I already have in my collection. Now the palettes that I'm going to use to dupe the newest palette is basically Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, Too Faced Natural Notes palette and Alter Ego Blooms palette. Very few shades from here, but yeah, majorly I would say both the Too Faced palettes. So let's begin duping. Now again, I have a lot of palettes. I do have the Anastasia Beverly Hills Norvina 5 palette, which has a lot of purpley shades, so you can definitely get similar tones and vibe with it. But yes, let's begin duping all the shades. The first shade in the palette is called Quartz, which is a marbleized shimmer shade, and this is being duped by the shade called Kala from the Blooms palette. Again, it is a very champagne shade with like a pinky undertone. The next shade in the palette is called Aura, which is more of the deepened rosy brown shade, and this is a matte shade, and this is being duped by the shade called Truffle from the Too Faced Natural Notes palette. The third shade in the palette is called Gratitude, which is being duped by the shade called Cocoa from the Too Faced Natural Notes palette. This is more of like a mid-tone pinky brown shade. The fourth shade in the palette is a marbleized shimmer, and this is called Cosmic Love, and this is being duped by the shade called PSL and Chill from the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette. Now if you guys do not have the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette and you're particularly looking for that shade, and if you do have the It Spell Cosmetics Flare Collection Remix palette, a very similar shade to that is this shade, which is called Star Ruby from the palette. The fifth shade in the palette is called Empowered, and this is the only shade that I could not find in all of the 3 palettes that I'm going to talk about. And this is the shade that is being duped by the shade called D3 from the Anastasia Beverly Hills Norvina 5 palette. I would say it is more of a blackened purple shade in a shimmer formula. I could only find it in my ABH Norvina 5 palette. Now let's move on to the last shade in that row, which is called Joy. And this is basically a warm tone pink shimmer shade, and this is being duped by the shade called Petunia from the Blooms palette from Alter Ego. Let's move on to the next row. The first shade in the row is called Precious, and this I have duped with by mixing 2 shades from the Too Faced Natural Notes palette, and the shades that I'm mixing is Truffle and Warm Rose. This is more of a cool tone purpley gray shade. The next shade in the palette is called Energized, and this is a champagne shimmer with a bronziness to it, and this I am gonna dupe it with the shade called Sparkling Sand from the Too Faced Natural Notes palette. The next shade in the palette is that glossy finish, which is called Love Stone, and this I'm basically not duping it with anything, but if you guys want to get a similar glossy finish, I would highly suggest this from Pat McGrath, and this is their Bronze Astral Gloss. This is a vinyl lip gloss, but I've used this on my eyes too, just to give like more of a glossy finish, and that's the same formula of that Huda Beauty gloss formula in that palette. The next shade in the palette is called Cherished, and this is a matte pale pink shade, and this is being duped by the shade called Petal from the Too Faced Natural Notes palette. The next shade in the palette is called Blissful, and this is being duped by the shade called Want a Piece of Me from the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, and this is more of a cool toned purpley shimmer shade. The last shade in the second row is called Happiness, and this is being duped by the shade called Lush from the Blooms palette. And this is more of like a deep pinky raspberry shade in a matte formula. Now let's move on to the last row of the palette. And the first shade is called Mantra, and this is being duped by the shade called Cocoa Drizzle from the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette. And this is more of a cool toned brown shade in a matte finish. The next shade in the palette is called Serenity, and this is being duped by the shade called LA Mode from the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette. Now this is again a very cool toned purple shade, but in more of a light undertone. And this is what I have like on the crease of my eye. By the way, if you guys do want to see how I achieve this look, it would be at the end of the video. So you can see how I achieve this look by using the dupe shades from my collection. The next shade in the palette is called Abundance, and this is being duped by the shade called Sparkling Rum from the Too Faced Natural Nudes palette. And this is a beautiful, I would say, a shimmer, like a duochrome shimmer with maroon and bronze and brown in it. And I absolutely love the shade. This is what I have right in the center of my eyelid, joining the outer corners of the eye. The next shade in the palette is called Moon Magic, and this is the shade that I duped from the Flare Collection Remix palette, and the shade is called Rose Water, the center shade of the palette. And this is a beautiful duochrome of like pinky purple to a blue finish, and this is what I have like in my inner third of my eyelid. The second last shade in the palette is called Radiate, and this is being duped by the shade called Love You a Latte from Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, and this is more of a mid-tone purpley gray shade. Beautiful for any cool tone purpley looks or pinky looks. I absolutely love this shade. Definitely a staple in my collection. I often go to that shade always from the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette because that's how much I love that shade. The last shade in the palette is called Self Love, and this is being duped by the shade called Oh My God from the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, and this is more of like a pale cool tone pink shimmer shade, and I absolutely love that shade. That is what I have in my inner corner of the eye. So those were the shades of the Too Faced Rose Quartz palette, which I duped from the palettes that I already had in my collection. Now if you want to see how I achieved this eye look, then please keep on watching. I took the shade called Petal from the Too Faced Natural Nudes palette, and I dusted it all across my eyelid just to set my concealer. And then I took the shade called Love You a Latte from Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, and I'm dusting it all across my crease just so that I have more of a mauvey purpley transitioning shade. I'm also going to dust the same shade on my lower lash line. To deepen the outer corner, I'm going to take the shade called Truffle from the palette, from the Too Faced Natural Nudes palette. I'm just going to place that on my outer corners of the eye. I'm going to take the shade called Sparkling Rum from the Too Faced Natural Nudes palette. I'm going to apply that right in the center of my eyelid, just joining it to the deepening shade in the outer corners. Now I'm going to take the shade called Rose Water from the Flare Collection Remixed palette, and I'm going to apply that right from my inner third of the eyelid to the center of my eyelid. Now for my inner corners, I'm going to take the shade called Oh My God from the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, and I'm going to apply that right in my inner corner of the eye. Just like that. I'm going to finish off my eyes with some liner and mascara, and I'll get right back. I really hope that you guys enjoyed all the dupes and the eye look that I created for you guys. I absolutely love the color story, and that's why I'm duping this palette. I think $67, it's definitely on the pricier side, especially for the tones that we already have in our collection. I still drool over the Mercury Retrograde palette from Huda Beauty. I always tell myself to go forward for that palette, but only because it's an older palette. I don't think you guys would be interested if I review that palette. That's why I do not have that in my collection. Instead, I have a lot more, and palettes keep releasing like every day of the life. So yeah, Nothing needed as such, but talking about the Rose Quartz palette, I think the color story is absolutely gorgeous. So if you guys want to purchase that, I'm never going to say no to that. But if you do have these palettes already in your collection, you already do have these shades with you. So that's all the purpose of the video. So if you did like this video, do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.